Hello, Voices of Wrestling listener. Dave Ryan here. Have you ever wondered to yourself how many hidden gems are hidden away inside the last years of World Championship Wrestling? Have you ever asked yourself how many tenuous gags can be made about the name Mike Enos? And have you ever thought about what it sounds like for two Irishmen to interpret a very chaotic company through its B show? The answers to all this and more are just a click away. Check out Days of Thunder every second Thursday on the Voices of Wrestling podcast network.
Hi, I'm Case Lowe, co-host of the Open the Voice Gate podcast. The one question I'm constantly asked when it comes to Dragon Gate is how do I get into the promotion? Well, stop asking and start listening to the Open the Voice Gate podcast, released every Wednesday on the Voices of Wrestling podcasting network. For exclusive news and show reviews, look no further than the leader in Dragon Gate coverage, Open the Voice Gate.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. A little bit of a surprise episode from me, your host, Jesse Collings. I just had some free time this afternoon. I guess it's evening time because I'm recording this at a little bit before 7 p.m. on Friday, August 11th. Had some extra time and just had a few topics I wanted to discuss and didn't have a guest booked, but this is the part of the pro of being able to run your own podcast is that if I feel like talking about something, I can just hit record and I can start blabbing about it. And hopefully people are interested in listening to it. As I will preface all of my solo audio with, this might be terrible, it might be awful audio. If it is, I apologize. But so far people have responded kindly to the solo episodes. So I'm going to keep doing them when I feel like it. Yeah, and I started with a hello friends greeting. That's a Jim Nance says when he does the Masters. I don't really like Jim Nance as a fan of AFC, a major AFC team that has played many big games on CBS. I've had Jim Nance call a lot of the games for my favorite team, and I do not like him as a commentator, but I do like it in the Masters when he says, "Hello, friends." Makes me feel warm, makes me feel safe. It's a nice way to greet your viewer. Because they're not just your viewer, they're your supporters. Podcast wouldn't be possible without the supporters. So these people are my friends. Each and every one of you listeners is my friend. Unless I've met you in real life and I've told you explicitly they are not my friend, because then we're not friends. But for all of you who I've never met before or I have met and had kind interactions with, hello, friends. Anyway, I kind of had three separate topics to talk about, one in WWE, one in AEW, and one in New Japan Pro Wrestling. And they're kind of all going to blend into kind of being the same theme, which is kind of a loose evaluation of each roster and kind of where certain wrestlers are right now. But we'll start with AEW. And the reason I wanted to start with AEW is we are now 3 weeks away from All In, the biggest show in company history, one of the biggest wrestling shows of all time. And from an attendance perspective, it's going to be the biggest wrestling show of all time, unless you count the North Korea, New Japan, and WCW shows, which I don't count because that's not a paid audience. And people supposedly had like guns in the back of their head telling them they have to go to the Mayday Stadium to witness Antonio Inoki and Ric Flair. If I was a military dictator, if I were to be one, then perhaps I would be setting up wrestling cards and making my people watch them. Probably not with a gun to their back. I don't think I could be that. But then again, I couldn't be a military dictator, could I? If I was afraid to do that. But anyway, this is going to be over 80,000 fans. It's going to be one of the biggest shows of all time. And we should be feeling, as fans, like this AEW is on a roll heading into their biggest event of all time and going to set the record for highest attended wrestling show of all time. But that doesn't seem to be the case. And there's a number of reasons for that. But I think in general, what I've noticed from interacting with a lot of different people and hearing from a lot of different fans and talking to some of my colleagues in the wrestling media space, the wrestling analyst space, there's a tremendous amount of anxiety about AEW. More so than usual. There's always been anxiety about AEW. Are they going to be able to make it? Are they going to be able to exist? Are they going to be able to survive? are they just going to be a flash in the pan? Can they last a month? Can they last a year? Can they last several years? Can they, run successful pay-per-view events? Can they keep drawing? Can they run a stadium show? All of this anxiety about AEW has existed for a while, pretty much since the company was first announced. But the anxiety that I find today is not concerning business success, which seems to be where a lot of the anxiety comes from, which is that the company is going to fail financially and therefore go away. The anxiety that I sense now is about the content and quality of the product. And I think it's a very specific type of anxiety in relating to quality. I think most people will tell you that AEW Dynamite and AEW Collision are good wrestling shows each week. They're entertaining. They have good matches. They might have a good angle or two. The shows are good. The pay-per-view events are the same thing. Every pay-per-view event seems to get really positive feedback, and most people would agree that AEW pay-per-views are pretty much can't miss in terms of quality. So that's never been AEW's issue, is that the product is good or not. And even now, the product still seems to be good more often than it is not. But there seems to be kind of a prolonged discussion that has now stretched back really since the start of this year concerning, I think, the long-term direction of the company, and particularly where are all these wrestlers headed in terms of AEW? What kind of storylines have been set up for them? What types of feuds are they in? What kind of character are they developing? And as we sit here 3 weeks away from the biggest wrestling event the biggest event in AEW's history, it seems like there's not a clear direction for a lot of major stars on the show. And that is reflective of the lack of clear direction and clear character work of a majority of AEW's roster. And I'm not going to go up and down the entire roster and tell you who's doing what. But if you look at this card that we have for All In, and part of the reason is we only have a few matches for this card, and I think okay, MJF and Adam Cole, they have a very clear direction. It's easily the strongest match on the show based on, the storyline, fan interest. Obviously, it's probably going to be the main event. The world title is on the line, all of that stuff. That's good. And you could throw in some of the people that are around that feud, like Roderick Strong. Now it looks like, Matt Taven and Mike Bennett are involved. So those people have a clear direction. Looks like we're going to get Young Bucks and FTR. I would say that really doesn't have a strong direction, but they're at least stepping into that feud, which they can heat up pretty quickly because there's so much animosity between the two teams, both real and perhaps both kayfabe and perhaps real. And obviously fans are kind of divided on that. That should work. I'm not worried about that match at all. I think the crowd will be hot for it. It will feel big. It will feel important, even if it's being done on kind of a quick build. Outside of that, I look at this roster and I say, what's going on? What are they doing at All In? Let alone what they're going to do at All Out, which is only a week later. That's a different issue. And kind of how that's reflective of broader issues, I think, with AEW creative and the AEW roster in general. Let's look at this thing. Like CM Punk, who comes back, like when CM Punk was being rumored to come back, to me, it was so obvious that CM Punk needs to feud with Kenny Omega and the Elite. That is the question that everyone is going to be asking. It's the obvious thing that they should try to do, because it's also the right thing to do. If we can show the world that these people can work together and be on the same page, that would relieve a lot of fan concern in relation to those two parties not being able to get along and that being bad for AEW. But okay, you can't do that because they still hate each other or whatever. But CM Punk really has been kind of directionless since he returned to AEW. He's feuded with Ricky Starks. He's feuded with Jay White. He's feuded with Samoa Joe. He's teasing this feud with MJF over, how he never really lost the title and he's the real world champion. Obviously, that should be setting up MJF versus CM Punk, but it seems kind of weird that they haven't interacted at all. Maybe they're just waiting to finish this Adam Cole story with MJF. And this Adam Cole story with MJF, I don't think it's going to be ending at All In. I think it's just going to be beginning, because I think one of them is going to turn on the other, and that's going to lead to a big feud. So when is CM Punk going to get involved? I don't think he's going to be challenging MJF for the title at All Out in Chicago. It makes sense for him to do that in Chicago because it's his city, but that's only 1 week after All In, and you're going to do that match on a 6-day build? I really hope not. And so I don't know really where CM Punk fits into AEW. It looks like they're going to do CM Punk versus Samoa Joe at All In, which is kind of strange because they made a big deal about how they had this big rivalry in the Owen Hart tournament, and they did the match and CM Punk won and he finally beat Samoa Joe, and I was like, okay, that was a fine way to kind of reintroduce CM Punk to AEW, but it seemed like they kind of pushed past that, and now they're gonna have a major match at this Wembley Stadium show. I mean, if you look at the card, that has a chance to be the second biggest match on the show, right behind the world title. And I just don't feel like they've had a personal huge feud. And if that was the case, CM Punk should have been feuding with Samoa Joe kind of this entire time. Like, CM Punk should have lost that match to Samoa Joe in the first round and then kind of be chasing him and hopefully settling the score at Wembley Stadium. Instead, CM Punk beat Samoa Joe. CM Punk spent like a month and a half feuding with Jay White and then Ricky Starks, and now he's back to wrestling Samoa Joe. I just don't find that to be really consistent at all. And I've liked Collision so far. I think it's a good show, just like Dynamite is a good show. Like the week-to-week quality of the shows, it's not an issue. But it's one of those things where you start being concerned about the directions of everyone on the roster, and is creative kind of losing focus. We talked about how Tony Khan had his first, his first 4 champions for AEW all mapped out in his head. And, there was a lot of long-term booking and long stories taking place. And now it just kind of seems like they're winging it. And I think that's reflected in a lot of these wrestlers not having clear directions. And it's reflected in not having a card figured out for All Out, or for All In. For All In and for All Out. That's gonna drive me crazy. They're 1 week apart, and I keep calling All In All Out. But I'm sure I'm not the only person who's doing that. But not even just CM Punk. Ricky Starks. What's Ricky Starks doing? Okay, he did have this kind of micro feud with CM Punk that lasted a few weeks. That seems like it probably should continue based on the results of their match on Collision. But now CM Punk's back to working with Samoa Joe. What does that leave for Ricky Starks? Ricky Starks had to turn heel for this feud. I wouldn't have done that. I thought he was getting over organically as a babyface, and that is something you cannot take for granted in wrestling. But he had to turn heel because he's feuding with CM Punk. Is he still feuding with CM Punk? What the hell is going on there? And that's again, Ricky is someone who has come a long way in the past year. He's really gotten over. I think the fans are going to buy him as a main eventer. And they've bought him in the feud with Chris Jericho, his brief challenge with MJF, and this feud with CM Punk. Now's not the time to be messing around with him. But he's another one where part of it is because of how weird CM Punk's return and how weird kind of the top feuds on Collision have kind of shifted around various people feuding with CM Punk, that it's kind of like a game of musical chairs, and the music stops and suddenly, there's only one seat left and only one person can feud with CM Punk. And that leaves Ricky Starks, and that leaves the Bullet Club Gold kind of standing while the music stops. Jay White, I think, Bullet Club Gold, Juice Robinson, the Ass Boys, the Guns. I think they've done a really good job as performers. I think Jay White's come across really well since Collision started. I think that Juice Robinson has been great. I think the Guns are a good kind of understudy tag team that to kind of work underneath them. They can eat pins in multi-man matches and those kind of things. But again, had this feud with CM Punk, did the great match with FTR. But what's Jay White doing for All In? He's not wrestling CM Punk, and he's not wrestling FTR again. So what's he up to? I'm sure they're gonna come up with something for him, but I feel like we should know that a few weeks away from the major show. And again, someone who just doesn't have clear creative direction. Um, you can move over to some Dynamite guys. Kenny Omega, is he wrestling Konosuke Takeshita? That seemed like that was an obvious feud coming out of Blood and Guts. It seems like there's so much heat on this Callis and Takeshita and fans really want to see Kenny Omega get his revenge on Callis and Takeshita. But now we have this whole Jericho angle getting involved, where Chris Jericho is kind of overshadowing Takeshita and Callis's stable. We don't really know where that's going. Maybe it's going in a creative way. I could see like maybe Jericho not teaming with Callis. Jericho kind of turns babyface, and Callis wants revenge on Jericho. But again, it's kind of unnecessary. Why can't Kenny Omega and Konosuke Takeshita just settle their differences in a major match at All In? Why can't we do that? That seems like the obvious thing. Kenny Omega gets his revenge on Don Callis by beating his protege. It's going to be a great match. It's a great singles match on a huge venue. It will be great for Takeshita to be in that moment. Why can't we just do that? Why is Chris Jericho getting involved? And I am a big Chris Jericho fan. I'm not one of these nutcase Jericho, anti-Jericho people who thinks that he's constantly hogging the glory of everyone else and he never puts anyone over or any of that nonsense. But this is strange to me. Kind of how he's got involved in this angle, even though like in a vacuum, I think Callis and Jericho have been great together. I love their interactions. I loved the Bad News Allen kind of mentions. I love the painting with Bad News looking down from heaven on Jericho and Callis. That's awesome. But and again, that's part of the issue with AEW to an extent, where in a vacuum, week to week, the shows are good, the segments are good, but in the long term, what are we looking at? What are we building? And is that negatively impacting the rest of the roster and kind of the long-term star power of certain wrestlers and just keeping fans engaged? In relation to the Jericho thing, it looks like he's going to feud with Sammy Guevara again or Daniel Garcia. It's kind of strange because if Jericho turns his back on the Jericho Appreciation Society, he's got Sammy and Daniel Garcia, both who would be the logical person for him to feud with as the kind of you turned your back on us, and now I'm going to kick your ass. So it's kind of like Sammy and Daniel Garcia are going to take turns doing that. I guess you could do Takeshita and Jericho versus Sammy and Daniel Garcia. And by the way, Jericho's apparently going to be wrestling Will Ospreay on the show. That's the rumor that Jericho is going to wrestle Will Ospreay. So maybe we'll get Omega versus Takeshita, Jericho versus Will Ospreay. That wouldn't be too bad. But as far as a regular Dynamite viewer and what we're seeing, which is kind of what I'm getting at here, it doesn't seem like there's a clear direction for these guys. It seems all very muddled. And if it comes down to Jericho eventually feuding with Sammy and Daniel Garcia, I think like Daniel Garcia should get that like the primary role in that feud, because I think Sammy Guevara, to me, I like Sammy. I think he is very talented, but we've already seen Sammy kind of get several pushes and he's gotten that shot. Daniel Garcia really has not. And I think Daniel Garcia at this moment has higher potential than Sammy Guevara as a top guy. I think Danny Garcia is more over right now than Sammy Guevara. I think the whole "you're a wrestler" chant will totally take over, especially as he's feuding with Chris Jericho. And I think Garcia should be one of those guys to beat Chris Jericho, just like Ricky Starks did. I think that is I think if I were to pick between him and Sammy, I think he's the obvious choice. Now, I think they rate Sammy higher. Tony is obviously a huge fan of Sammy Guevara. So it wouldn't surprise me if Jericho and Sammy is the primary feud and Daniel Garcia is kind of underneath that. That would be a mistake, obviously, but I could see that's the way they're doing. But again, we don't really know where they're headed in that direction. Because Jericho is still figuring out this thing with Callis. And I get, I don't want to make it seem like we need clear answers for where all these people are going right now, because that's not how booking works. And really, we shouldn't have clear directions for everyone at all times. We should not necessarily know where something is going. But there's a difference between having that kind of element to a wrestling show and having a show that is just, over the long term, wrestlers seem inconsistent in the way that they're presented. They maybe have a few big matches and then they're off TV entirely. They don't seem to have clear opponents, or they're just kind of, in multi-man matches. There's a difference between having kind of a structured storytelling and uncertainty like I would say the MJF and Adam Cole angle is a structured moment of uncertainty. We as viewers really don't know who's going to turn on who, and that's exciting. But we know that they're at least engaged in this feud and there's a plan there. It's hard for me to see if there is a real long-term plan with Jericho, Kenny Omega, Takeshita, Callis, Sammy Guevara, Daniel Garcia. I don't know where any of those guys are going. So, and maybe there's a master plan and all of these strings are going to be pulled and it's all going to be woven together and it's going to be great. But it just seems really muddied right now. And I think that's contributing to this anxiety. You can move over to the women's division, similar thing like Hikaru Shida. I think her match with Toni Storm was great. I love seeing her win the title. Seems very over. She's going to have a big match, in the 4-way at Wembley Stadium at the All In show. Does she hold the title for a long time? It seems kind of like maybe one of those title wins where she wins it and then she'll lose it right back to Toni Storm. It's a 4-way match, so she doesn't necessarily even have to be pinned, so that can kind of continue the feud. Not really a clear direction with her, not real clear direction with a lot of the women's division. Britt Baker's in this match, but Britt Baker and Jamie Hayter before she got hurt, and Sheeta's been in the mix as well, obviously. They've kind of had this really prolonged feud with I can't even remember their name right now. The Saraya and Ruby Soho and Toni Storm stable. But they've been in this feud for a really long time, and it kind of seems like they should have had a blow-off match by now, and it just kind of keeps going and going and going, and it seems like sometimes some people get added to it and some people get detracted from it. I'd like to see a clear resolution to that. Maybe they need to have kind of a big blow-off match because it's been going on too long. And again, it seems kind of like one of those things where, they've been feuding with each other, but it seems to vary week to week on how hard they're feuding with one another. So that leads to like kind of a lack of consistency that I'm talking about. But yeah, I mean, and then this other thing in the women's division I want to point out, this is a separate issue, but this TBS title, I did not think that they needed a second women's title. I said at the time, I'd rather have them take time to develop meaningful feuds that don't necessarily have to involve a title than to just have a secondary title, which can be used as a crutch to have matches. And that TBS title is a crutch to have matches. There's almost no storyline ever associated with it. There's the matches just kind of seem to happen. Chris Statlander will be defending the TBS title against this person. There's very little storyline effort put into the TBS title. And the worst part about it is that it seems to be siloed off away from like the rest of the women's division. And the AEW women's division is not deep enough to have like two totally separate divisions of people going for a certain title. It's almost like there's a roster split where you have some of the women are in the AEW women's world title universe, and then other women are in the TBS title universe, and they're not stacked equally. A majority of the top performers are in the women's championship. And really the only person in the TBS championship orbit that I think is like worth a damn is Chris Statlander. So it's Chris Statlander defending her title against a lot of lower card performers. And the division's not deep enough. If you're going to make the TBS title a thing, and this is the same exact issue that the Jade Cargill title reign ran into, which was Jade never really had any quality opponents she never wrestled anyone that would be considered like a major star in AEW's women's division. Like she wrestled Nyla Rose, she wrestled Taya, but you look at who are like the top 8 or 9 wrestlers, women wrestlers in AEW from both a star power and in-ring standpoint. You would say Toni Storm, Ruby Soho, Britt Baker, Jamie Hayter, Thunder Rosa when she was healthy, Statlander, who now has the title, Jade, who's missing, but would definitely be considered one of the top stars in that division. Hikaru Shida, the current champion, of course, Riho, former champion. Like, if you look at those names, almost all those women are in the women's title universe. And the TBS title is like this neglected title where you defend against preliminary wrestlers. And it's hurt Chris Statlander. I thought she came back and had a ton of momentum. And she won the title. Great. She beat Jade Cargill. Great. really cool moment when she did that. Awesome moment. Crowd popped huge for it. Very memorable. But since then, what has she done? Nothing really of note. I know she's on Collision. But because she's really only, like I said, allowed to feud with lower card women's wrestlers, nothing she does is that interesting. And I really just think that I don't really know why they book like this, because the division's not deep enough to have like an A title and a B title and have that B title be interesting. Just not. So that's kind of a separate issue. But again, Statlander seems someone without a long, even despite the fact that Chris Statlander has a world title in AEW, she doesn't seem like someone that has a long-term storyline or plan. Hangman Page, he had that big feud. He's really only feuded with Jon Moxley this year, and those 2 matches that they had were fantastic. Well, they had 3 matches, I think. The Texas Death match is one of the best matches of the year. It's one of the best matches in AEW history. It might be my match of the year this year. I'll have to go through it. It's going to be tough for me to rate anything higher than Kenny Omega versus Will Ospreay 2 from Forbidden Door, but that Texas Death match is right in the mix. And I think Page has been great this year, but he hasn't wrestled that much. He hasn't had many singles matches. He's really only had 1 feud, and now it looks like the BCC feud is over. And this is a major star, like really one of your like 4 or 5 biggest single stars in AEW, I think undisputedly. And he doesn't seem to have any direction at all for All In. And that's really disappointing. And I look at some of these other people that I've named so far that don't seem to have clear directions, one of them being Jay White. And I think, man, what if those 2 guys had a great match together? Why can't they feud with each other now? Jay White's on Collision and Hangman is on Dynamite, and might be asking too much for them to be in the same locker room. Like, I don't know if Hangman Page should come over to Collision, but they should be having a feud or something like that. Feud with a top guy. Page is a top guy, and he needs other top opponents to feud with. And outside of the Jon Moxley feud, it just simply hasn't been there for him this year, and that's really disappointing. I liked his work in the Elite versus BCC feud, but that was kind of him being a collective along with the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. He's an independent star now. That was kind of the whole story, was him going out on his own and making it. Is he going to feud with Dark Order? I don't think so. Like, I don't think he should be like, he needs a top feud. And I like Evil Uno, and I like Stu Grayson, and I like Silver and Reynolds, but they are not top guys that should be wrestling. Like, Evil Uno and Hangman Page is not the kind of match I would envision for Hangman Page wrestling at Wembley Stadium. And I think everyone would agree with that. So he's another guy that I have a problem with. And then, you got these guys like Wardlow who were pushed really hard, and they disappear off the face of the earth once they kind of fall out of the title picture. When is he going to come back? And is he going to come back? Is he going to feud with Christian and Luchasaurus? I'm not sure. Just all of this seems like problems with the broader long-term booking plans of AEW. And that is where I think a lot of this anxiety is coming from. And I just kind of ran through a bunch of names on the roster, but you can see that there's just a lot of question marks, not in how talented these people are, and not in are these people over or not, but just kind of what they're doing. And I think the company needs to, and it's too late now because it's All In and All Out are right around the corner. But I almost just think you need to hit a big reset button and start over with new feuds for everyone in a lot of cases. Like, kind of like have that kind of typical or idealistic Raw after WrestleMania show where or what's a better example is New Year's Dash, right? Wrestle Kingdom's over, and now here we're going to start teasing some new feuds for everyone. AEW just needs to have like one of those shows to, I think, kind of get everything back on track, come up with feuds for everyone, come up with angles, and then push them out in quick succession on a couple of weeks of television. It's too late for that. You can't do that and then expect to draw big, or can't expect to draw big, but they're already sold 80,000 tickets, so that doesn't matter. But you can't expect to have a ton of fan interest in 2 or 3 week built feuds. So it's too late for that. But if I were to like give some advice to Tony Khan, I would say after you get through All In, after you get through All Out, really like look at the storyboard of what's going on here in AEW and get people back on track, because I don't think it's a case of people have stopped getting over. Like, I don't think Hangman Page is less over. Okay. So all you have to do is just put him in something that the fans care about, and fans are going to respond. And that's true for a lot of these people on the roster. I feel like it's just been lacking lately. And I think fans can see that, and the more perceptive fans are starting to get very concerned. So that was my AEW rant. Let's switch gears. Let's go to WWE. And of course, I talked a lot about WWE last week on my episode, on the episode of the show with Josh Nason. We talked a lot about the bloodline and kind of the strides WWE has made in appealing to its current fan base, and obviously business being up and kind of the reasons for that. But I kind of want to just run through the SummerSlam show real quick. I'm not going to like review each match because that was a week ago, so who cares? But I kind of want to run through just kind of the different participants on each match, and kind of look at where they're going in WWE, if that makes sense, and kind of give where do they stand in the company and that kind of thing. Opening match was Logan Paul versus Ricochet. Logan Paul is a celebrity, so and the fans, I don't think he's over as a babyface, but the fans kind of respect him a lot more as a wrestler than they did when he first debuted, which, why wouldn't they? He's been excellent given his level of experience. But what this match was really about to me was like Ricochet getting like a real opportunity in WWE, which he just hasn't gotten a lot of. They'll throw him into like a multi-man ladder match, and they'll let him do some high spots. But for this show, he had a real feud. He exchanged promos with Logan Paul, and he went out there and he had an 18-minute match on a pay-per-view on SummerSlam in front of 50,000 fans. And that's kind of like what we always hoped Ricochet would be allowed to do in WWE. And he just hasn't gotten that many opportunities. And I think, they had an idea, which is like, we want Logan Paul to do a bunch of athletic stuff and have these gifts that go viral on social media. So they put him in the ring with a guy that can do all that stuff and can keep up with him and help him get through all the plant high spots. So they picked Ricochet. I don't think it necessarily confirms that like WWE really believes in Ricochet, that Ricochet is suddenly going to get a giant push in WWE, because I don't think Vince McMahon really sees much in him. And when that happens, I don't care that Triple H is like pretending to still be in charge. Ricochet is not going to get a gigantic push as long as Vince McMahon is calling shots in WWE. But that being said, this was a very nice match for him to have, and I'm happy that he's able to at least get that opportunity, because there are a lot of guys in WWE that kind of have similar talents, and we just don't see them get the same kind of opportunity like that. And this was at least a chance for Ricochet to be presented like a serious main roster star, which is unfortunately there's been few and far between opportunities for that have been few and far between. Second match was Cody Rhodes versus Brock Lesnar. This was kind of the end of Cody Rhodes' feuds. I'll tell you what, I did not like the ending to WrestleMania. I thought it was a terrible finish, and I thought they made a big mistake by Cody Rhodes not winning. I do think Cody should be like kind of really grateful for Brock Lesnar being there for him to wrestle, because I do think Brock is such a big figure in WWE still, that Cody feuding with Brock, it doesn't feel like Cody took a step down because he lost the match at WrestleMania, which is what my big fear would be Cody has gotten over as a top babyface, and now that he's failed at WrestleMania and he lost against the biggest star in the company in Roman Reigns, there's nowhere to go but down. And I don't think he's as hot as he was going into WrestleMania, but I do think that this long feud with Brock Lesnar has at least allowed him to maintain a level of babyface aura that is important for his long-term survival as a drawing babyface in WWE. And so they had their match. Brock at the end, despite turning heel, is now a babyface again by shaking Cody Rhodes' hands. We never found out why Brock Lesnar attacked Cody Rhodes and turned on him in the first place. It was just never explained. Apparently Brock went into business for himself by doing that, but who knows if that's true or not. It was all very confusing to the viewer, I guess, but I don't think fans ultimately really care if Brock Lesnar is a heel or a babyface, or really what any of Brock Lesnar's motivations are for anything. He's Brock Lesnar. He comes out, he suplexes people, he gives them the F5. He's the most believable badass in all of wrestling. Like, I don't think people think too complex about Brock Lesnar's character, and he can get away with a lot of stuff, as from the way he interacts with people, the way he kind of switches between being a babyface, being a heel, beating up baby faces, beating up heels. He can get away with all that because he's Brock Lesnar and he has that aura, and basically nobody else does. The Battle Royal, LA Knight won the Slim Jim Battle Royal. We'll probably talk about this on WrestleNomics this week, but I think the WWE made $7 million in advertisement revenue, according to the Observer this week. And we're going to start seeing more and more of this stuff. Like the advertisers are going to have sponsored matches and things like that. And if you watch any major sporting event, like the Super Bowl, obviously is a perfect example. Like every single bit of the Super Bowl is sponsored. You've got someone sponsoring the pregame show. You got someone sponsoring like the introductions. You got someone sponsoring the coin flip. You got somebody sponsoring the national anthem. You got someone sponsoring the halftime show. You got someone sponsoring all the replays that they show, the post-game show, the trophy ceremony, like every single aspect of the show sponsored. And that's true for a lot of professional sports events. And wrestling has always kind of under-monetized those events. And having these specialty matches, and they've had like the main events have been sponsored by major sponsors before and things like that, but we're going to start seeing more and more of those. I don't really like I don't like the corniness of ones, like obviously the zombies attacking Miz for the movie, the Batista movie or whatever, was bad. I don't like it when it's like, oh, it's the Pizza Hut Battle Royal, and like there's a lot of obnoxious product placement. But when it's just someone sponsoring something, that's fine. Who could possibly be bothered by that? I'm numb to it as a real sports fan. I never noticed that, this pitcher's change is sponsored by Amica Insurance. I'm just numb to that. But LA Knight won. LA Knight's getting really over. He's getting great reactions from the fans. And, that was the right choice. This was mostly a geek battle royal, but there was people like Sheamus and AJ Styles and people with more credibility in there. But LA Knight won. Then we had the MMA rules match, Shayna Baszler versus Ronda Rousey. Shayna Baszler won. This match was not good, as I could have told you beforehand, because wrestling fans do not like MMA rule matches. If they did, they'd be going to MMA fights and not going to wrestling events. Ronda Rousey, just an absolutely awful last year or 18 months in WWE. Her whole career is going to be so weird to evaluate as wrestling. It's really hard to remember kind of how big of a star she was when she first showed up in WWE, and she had that match at WrestleMania, and there was the whole, I think it was the Royal Rumble where she did the thing with The Rock. It was, her star has just fallen across the board since then. And she immediately, when she first came into wrestling, she was very enthusiastic, and, she was green, but her performances were pretty good. And kind of like Brock Lesnar, she had that aura of being a real badass that made people excited for it. But ever since she came back to the company, she's been bad. Her heart hasn't been into it. She's been cashing them paychecks, and she hasn't really done much. And I guess this was the last thing she wanted to do. She wanted to put over her friend Shayna Baszler, but Shayna Baszler, people in the main roster, people don't buy her as a real wrestler because she hasn't been presented really as a top star for a long time. I know when she first got called up to the main roster, she was, but ever since I think at WrestleMania she lost, people don't care about Shayna Baszler because she hasn't been presented that way, and people don't care about Ronda Rousey because she hasn't really been presented that way. So this was no good. Fans didn't like it. And, Ronda's, I'd be surprised if you ever see Ronda again wrestling. It really seems like she doesn't like it anymore. I don't know if she has time left on her dates or something like that. Maybe she'll rally and she'll want to do WrestleMania one year, but this might be the last Ronda Rousey wrestling match we ever see. And just kind of a strange legacy. Walter beat Drew McIntyre. I don't really have much to say other than Walter's the best wrestler in the company, and he is by a wide margin. And he should be, he should probably be pushed harder than he really is. He's doing well with the Intercontinental title. You know, he's had these great matches on the shows. That's great for him. But we're talking about, not only is he a great wrestler, but I think he's getting over. And I think he comes across as a legit intimidating heel. And I think you could put him with a lot of different baby faces. He's going to get the best out of them. He's such a good worker. He's so smart. He's so practical in what he does. He's just a great professional wrestler. That's the only way to describe it, is that he is a great professional wrestler. And WWE does recognize that because he's been pushed and he's been protected. It's almost time for him to do something more. He's on SmackDown. I don't see him ever feuding with Roman Reigns, just because Reigns seems like he's off in his own universe right now. But he probably deserves more at this point, because that guy is so good and he's gotten over and he's been kind of patient in WWE. He deserves more than this, what he's getting right now, I think. Seth Rollins versus Finn Balor. Seth is still a very, very good in-ring wrestler. But he's such a geek. And he's so phenomenally uncool. And the fact that he's over makes me think wrestling is less cool. Like the fact that he can come out and he's got an arena full of dorks singing his name and laughing and cheering him as he cackles like a madman. He's so phenomenally uncool. And the fact that he is so popular right now with fans in the live arena, it makes me think, man, this is like the dorkiest thing in the world. And I hope no one comes in the room while I'm watching this man cackle and be popular. Now, as a wrestler, he's still so good in the ring. He's so athletic. He comes across like a really great athlete with excellent timing, and he can sell really well. I didn't think this match was like amazing, but he gets it done in the ring. It makes me forgive a lot of the stuff he does, but man, his personality is so toxic to me as a fan. It makes me, he at one point he was one of my favorite wrestlers, like when he was in Ring of Honor, and then when he was in, FCW and NXT, and then when he was in the Shield, he really was one of my favorite wrestlers. I just don't really know what happened to him from a personality perspective. I guess he's doing what he can to get over in WWE, which is fine. But I guess I'll talk about this now. It's really more pertinent to Dominic getting over, but Seth also makes sense in the sense of, I have never felt less connected with WWE fans, and I have never felt like I have a worse understanding of what is going to be popular or get over with that fan base. And like I just described with Seth, I see Seth and I see a dork, and yet he's getting over. He's never really been more over than he has, where he's coming out wearing his goofy, obnoxious boots and wearing his crazy outfits and doing the weird dance. And to me, it's so uncool, but it's working and it's getting over with the fans. And that's kind of how I feel WWE at this point. Is the company is hot. The decisions they're making are working for their fan base, but I have never been less interested in watching the product. And I think it's impacting my ability to really analyze WWE's product in general, because I just simply do not know what that fan base wants. Because I see someone like Dominic Mysterio, and I see someone who is not talented. I see a bad wrestler, bad promo with no charisma. And the crowd likes to boo him. And it's kind of like this ironic, oh yeah, we love to hate him. But he's over. And, he's done really well going to NXT and having, matches on NXT that have popped ratings. And I'm like, is this the future of WWE, where this person who has no talent is ironically over by the fans and it moves business? And if that happens, what is the future of wrestling like? Is it going to be where you can be really bad in the ring and you can have no real charisma, but if Kevin Dunn presses a boo button for a few months, people will start reacting to it and getting over in the arenas, and then he'll eventually be popping ratings? it's not at all what I want in professional wrestling. And it's hard for me to kind of guess what's going to get over in WWE, because what gets over just seems to be almost random. I simply do not understand it anymore, and it's totally disillusioned me from watching the product on a regular basis. And it's made kind of discussing the product kind of frustrating, because a lot of people in this space will just default to, well, it's making money, so it's doing really well, so of course it's good. And that's true if you want to analyze the business side of things. And on WrestleNomics, we do that every week. And I'll never say that what WWE has done is a bad business strategy, because it's clearly not. But most people are not business analysts. Most people don't really care about the business side of wrestling. They care about whether they like something, whether it's entertaining to them. And in this space, Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast, that's what I want to talk about. And when I think about WWE, I just think all this shit fucking sucks. And I've been down on WWE for a long time, and I've slowly been kind of watching less and less of the product. And when I was watching SummerSlam, it was a moderately reviewed show in terms of people seem to generally think it was pretty okay. We'll get to the main event. But I'm watching that and I'm just like, I have no connection with this product, and it's making me sad watching it. And I don't understand why any of these people are over. I don't understand what any of these booking decisions are. And when the fans were all disillusioned and the fans are booing stuff and the ratings were down, like, at least I could say, like, okay, I'm in tune with what the fans want, because my views on the product are being reflected in business. So I didn't feel like I was disconnected with WWE. I thought Vince was disconnected with his fans. Now I'm not sure. It seems like they finally won. It seems like that they've convinced a lot of their fans that what they do is the right way to do things, and stuff's getting over. And I just don't know how much longer I can, like, credibly analyze WWE when I really have no idea what's going to get over. As a fan, of course. So moving on, women's match, another weird thing, like Bianca Belair beats Asuka and Charlotte Flair. Io Sky comes out, cashes in the title, and wins. Io Sky is a heel. She's part of Damage Control. They've been heels for a year. But the crowd, the crowd likes to see stuff happen. So they didn't, something happened. They saw someone cash in and they won the title, and Io Sky will get, her "you deserve a" chance. I think, unfortunately, Bianca has had a really hard time as women's champion. The problem with WWE right now is, the women's division WWE, is that they have two women wrestlers who are generally really awesomely over right now. It's Bianca Belair and it's Rhea Ripley, and they're on different brands and they both have titles. And the biggest match they could easily do is Rhea Ripley versus Bianca Belair, and they just haven't done it because they've decided, kind of like AEW with the women's title and the TBS title, they're now off on their own separate universes, and they're apparently not going to interact. And that's disappointing in terms of Rhea Ripley and Bianca Belair are like two of my like five favorite performers on the main roster at this point. So I'd like to see them wrestle each other. That would actually get me excited, but I don't know when that's going to happen. And WWE title, the world title match, tribal combat. I talked a lot. We talked a lot about the bloodline and story on last week's episode, so I'm not going to like relitigate it all here. But I thought the match was long. I thought the match was boring. I thought, these Roman Reigns matches are so predictable. They have the same layout every time. And to the degree that fans know and recognize the layout. So when the fans are watching, Roman's big main event matches, they are waiting for the ref bump. They're waiting for the interference. And anything that is before the ref bump and before the interference, they're not interested in. So you have Jey Uso and Roman Reigns having this match, and these guys aren't putting in a great effort. I know Roman Reigns was supposedly got hurt early in the match, but even before he gets hurt, and in other matches he's had, like these, we're doing punch kick, we're making faces, we're cutting mid-match promos. Like, this is not an interesting match at all. So we got like 20 minutes of that. Fans don't care because, again, they know the formula of Roman match and they're just waiting for something to happen. Even though the match was advertised as nobody can interfere in this match, so theoretically fans should not have been waiting for the ref bump and the interference to happen. because it was advertised as that of the match being that cannot happen. Not only do WWE fans recognize the formula, they also recognize that WWE is not going to pay attention to the stipulation. So, of course, there's a ref bump, there's interference. Jimmy Uso ran down, so Sikoa was involved. All that stuff happened. Roman Reigns retains, title continues. I understand why they did it because, the bloodline thing is moving business. And in wrestling, you ride something until the bitter end. And even when it stops drawing, you keep riding it. And then you eventually give up. Just the way hot angles work. If you look at the NWO, you can see the exact same thing. WWE ran like the evil, the Vince McMahon figure or the authority or the evil matchmaker, or the heel Raw general manager or whatever angle. They did that angle for 20 straight years because it worked for Steve Austin and Vince McMahon, and they continue to do it forever. And that's what you do in wrestling. You find something that's hot and then you do it forever. And the bloodline angle is hot, so it's probably going to be done forever, which means Roman Reigns is probably going to be champion forever. Not for me. I don't like it, as I've made clear, but it's obviously something that a lot of WWE fans like. So if you do like it, you're probably going to enjoy the next, 6 months to a year. But if you're like me and you're totally disillusioned with it, I don't know why you would watch SmackDown, because it seems to be the same thing over and over again with this feud. Anyway, that's me bitterly complaining about WWE and SummerSlam. I'm going to move on. I'm going to talk about the G1. So the G1, we're obviously not done with the G1. We just wrapped up the quarterfinals yesterday. Again, I don't know when people are going to listen to this, but again, I'm recording this on Friday, August 11th. So we're getting the semifinals soon. And then, of course, the final in the next few days. So maybe it's over by now, by the time you listen to this. I don't really have much to say about like the semifinals in general, in the sense of, it's Evil Okada and it's, Naito and Ospreay. And, I think it's probably going to be Okada Naito in the final, I would think. Maybe Okada Ospreay. I don't think Evil gets to the final, or maybe he does. Who cares? I think Naito's probably winning this. But I don't really care who wins the G1. I was talking about this with someone the other day, where it's like the G1 to me is all about like the quality of matches and kind of the broader stories that each wrestler is kind of telling as they go through. And I'm going to go through a lot of the names in the G1 and kind of give a perspective on how I feel about what they did in the G1 and where their stock is moving forward. I don't really care who wins. Like I like who, and the winner main events Wrestle Kingdom. Like I don't really care. Like it's probably going to be Okada. The main event of Wrestle Kingdom, it's going to be what I know about the main event of Wrestle Kingdom pretty much every year is that it's going to be Kazuchika Okada versus some other top star, and the match is going to be really good. And that's enough for me to get vested as a fan. I don't need anything more than that. So I don't really care who wins the G1. If they were really going the route of making a top star, like let's say Yota Tsuji was in the semifinal, I would be much more invested in it, because I think if you were to win the G1, that would really be saying something, as we really believe in this guy as our next top guy. With the remaining four guys, I mean, it's three guys. It's all former IWGP World Champions. Three guys that have basically headlined the Dome before. When they do it again, I'm sure the match will be great. I'll be excited for it. I don't need to be sold on that, but I don't really care about who's going to win the G1, being honest. But what I want to do is kind of just run through the names in each block, kind of give my thoughts on what they did in the G1. I haven't seen the entire tournament, but I've seen, I would say 80 to 85% of the matches. There are a few I skipped. Like I didn't watch a single Toru Yano match, so I kind of have nothing to say about him. I'm sure people will be very sad that I will not be giving a long Toru Yano review of his G1 performance. But just to run through, I'm going to try to do this really fast because of the 10 million people that were in the G1 this year. Sonata, was undefeated in his block, 14 points, most of the entire tournament. I thought Sonata was pretty good in this tournament. I thought he had some pretty good matches at times. I thought his match against Yota Tsuji was really good. I thought his match against Aminu was also good. I didn't think the match against Gabe Kidd was like awesome, but I did like kind of the heat and it felt more like an angle than a match, so it was kind of hard for me to rate that one. But I did like the kind of intensity Gabe Kidd brought to Sonata. I mean, to me, when I watched Sonata versus Yota Tsuji, I thought, man, this Yota Tsuji guy, he's a top guy. He's got charisma. He's an exciting wrestler. I just feel so good when I watch Yota Tsuji wrestle. And I think Sonata is Randy Orton. He looks the part. He moves the part. Some people insist that he is the part. The company books him like he's the part, but it just is. I get Sonata's not bad. I don't think that pushing him as champion is like was a mistake, because I do think you gotta take a chance on guys like this when you're trying to make a new star. And Sonata has a lot of the tools that you think will make a good star, but he's just not that guy. And again, like his G1 performance, real solid, not a standout. And when you're in a company with Kazuchika Okada and Will Ospreay and Tetsuya Naito, like you got to be a standout for me to think that you should be the top guy. And he's just not at that level. Hikuleo was kind of the big winner in terms of the A block as far as like a young guy going to get a big push. I thought his first few matches were not particularly good. He had a match against Chase Owens, which was just really boring, and it went 11 minutes, which was about 10 minutes too long. But throughout, as he got further in the tournament, I liked his match against Umino. I liked his match against Tsuji, and I liked his match against Kiyomiya too, and his match against Naito in the quarterfinal, which he finally lost. But I thought, Hikuleo is not an amazing wrestler to me, but I think he held up his end of the bargain. New Japan said, we're going to push you in this tournament. We're going to have you come out of A block, and we're going to put you in the quarterfinal. And I thought he had good enough matches where he can credibly be in the tournament for the next 10 years as the monster wrestler who can beat any top star at any time, really the bad luck Fale role. And I think he's way better than like the last several years of Fale. And I think he's probably better than like peak Fale, whenever you think that it was. I mean, he moves a lot better than Fale. He's much taller than Fale. Yeah, they probably weigh about the same. He's much more athletic than Fale. I think, he went out there with Naito. He had a pretty damn good match. And he went out there with Tsuji and Umino and Kiyomiya, younger athletes, and they had a damn good match. Is he going to be able to have a great match with Chase Owens? Probably not, but that's not important. What's important is that he can have good matches with the top stars, because his role is going to be, being a monster for those top stars to overcome in these tournaments. And I think he did a really good job of that. Yota Tsuji, I already kind of talked about him with Sonata, but out of the new Three Musketeers, I think Tsuji is easily the best wrestler. I think when I see him, I think, man, this guy I can see being on the same level as Okada or Naito or Tanahashi or Ospreay or Kenny Omega or Nakamura or these other, top stars in New Japan over the last 10 years. He's got a really exciting wrestling style. He does some power moves. He does some athletic moves. He comes across like an explosive athlete, which I love. He's got a great expressive face, and he makes great facials during the match. He's not overacting like Roman Reigns, but he comes across as very emotional and emotive when he wrestles, which is really good. He's got like a really big wide mouth and these like big teeth that I think help. He could be intimidating. He's got like this, he opens his mouth and he can be, depending on his face, he can look intimidating. He can look excited. He can look scared. He kind of has just a really expressive face. That's what I've noticed with him recently. And he just has it, man. If they picked a guy to push really hard from the get-go, he obviously already challenged Sonata for the title, and they chose right, because this guy's damn good. And I would have probably had him advance further in this tournament than he did. I understand why they went with Hikuleo. I don't think it's like the worst booking idea in the world. And I understand the parity between Narita, Umino, and Tsuji. But man, that guy was real good. He's my big winner of this tournament, as far as like people who showed out and did well. Moving on in the A block, again, more young guys. Ren Narita. Narita, I think, is firmly, ranked third in the new Three Musketeers. I don't think Ren Narita is bad. I think he's a pretty good wrestler, but he has a major problem. And the problem is the company decided that his gimmick was going to be, you're going to be the next Shibata, which is not a good gimmick for a couple of reasons. The first being, Shibata's gimmick was, he was this no-nonsense, ultra-serious wrestler. And he comes out in the black tights and the black boots like a young boy almost, because he doesn't care what his, outfit looks like. He doesn't care what his gear looks like. He just wants to go out there and kick your head off. And Shibata had a lot more size than Narita. He came across as, more credible, more intimidating. Narita going from, young lion wearing the black boots and black trunks to Shibata clone wearing the black boots and black trunks kind of makes it feel like he never graduated from being a young lion. And now he's cosplaying as this more popular wrestler. And I just don't think that's going to work for him because he's got to find his own niche. He's not nearly as big as Shibata. He looks kind of small out there in the G1, to me at least. I mean, obviously he's wrestling like Hikuleo, but look at this. I think you compare him to Umino, even Yoda Tsuji, Sanada, Kiyomiya, Gabe Kidd. Like he just looks small. And he doesn't have the credibility to be like have the badass aura that Shibata had. And so I think he's struggling to kind of stand out from that. I really just want him to get new gear and maybe a slight change in gimmick. I still think he's a good wrestler. He had some good matches this tournament. I loved the 2 draws mainly because I love draws in wrestling, and I liked the 20-minute time limit in this tournament because I like draws, and I wish there were more of them in just all of pro wrestling because I think they're an amazing tool for telling stories and to having ongoing feuds and things like that. But yeah, he had an okay tournament, but easily, if we're looking at, in this block, who was a breakout star, he's definitely behind Umino. He's definitely behind Tsuji. He's definitely behind Hikuleo. Hikuleo advanced. So not like a great tournament for Narita. I'm sure he'll get many more opportunities to kind of stand out. I think his gimmick has to change a little bit. Shota Umino, I thought did really well. I would have him just a hair below Tsuji in terms of like how much they accomplished in this tournament. He's getting over. He's a very good wrestler. He's turning into a very good wrestler. I think, he was plagued by inconsistencies. He wasn't in great shape. He obviously didn't have a great situation going over on his excursion to the UK right as the pandemic started. But he's shown, especially with like his matches with John Mox, when he's teaming with John Moxley and the 2 Forbidden Door matches, and sometimes in New Japan, he has flashed that he has top tier ability. He had that stinker with Naito earlier this year that kind of maybe set him back in some fans' eyes, but I think he's going to get there. I think he's a really talented guy. I like his look. I think his charisma is starting to connect more with the audience, and I think he's getting there as an in-ring guy where I could see him being a top in-ring guy in New Japan, which is really hard to do. It's a very high standard to hit, but I think he could get there. The rest of these guys, like, Kiyomiya, I don't really have a strong take on Kiyomiya. I think other people can talk about what's going on with Kiyomiya a lot more than me, but obviously, if you were a big Noah fan, his performance was disappointing. I don't think he had like many great matches. He was solid and he was okay. I really didn't think he stood out. And that would be more troubling than like, oh, he wasn't protected that well. Like, okay, that's fine. But I was looking, he's in a block with a bunch of guys who are in his age range, Narita, Umino, Tsuji, Hikuleo. Hikuleo's a little bit older, but, Gabe Kidd, all these guys that are around the same age as Kiyomiya. And Kiyomiya has a lot more experience, definitely a lot more like big match experience than these guys. And I didn't feel like he stood out. And if I was just an assessor of talent, that would kind of worry me. And I still think Kiyomiya is like a super talented guy, and he should still have a bright future. He's already so accomplished at his age and what he's been able to do in Noah. But as far as just this tournament goes, I would say like he doesn't look to me like a standout future superstar in professional wrestling. Not compared to Tsuji. And maybe some pro wrestling Noah fans are really going to have a strong reaction to that. But just from watching him in this tournament, I saw Kiyomiya and I was like, I don't think he really felt special. And I've seen his best work in Noah, and he is capable of being a great pro wrestler and having like a 5-star match and all that. But I don't think in this tournament he came across as special, and that would kind of trouble me because he's not being protected in booking, so he's going to need to come across as special as like an in-ring performer and having charismatically, and that's just not happening. Gabe Kidd, he was doing mostly character work in this tournament, just doing a lot of brawling before the match would start and getting on the ring. He had his match with Chase Owens only technically went on, 2 minutes and 55 seconds. His match with Hikuleo only went, 3 minutes. Like he's doing a gimmick. He's doing a lot of character work. I think Some people really like it. It's fine. I understand what he's going for. I kind of just want to see him get in the ring and wrestle guys because I think he's really good at that. So I didn't really love his tournament as far as like a quality standpoint, but I still think he has a bright future, and he's obviously a very good wrestler, and he does come across as a convincing jerk. So he should do really well in New Japan going forward. It was a strong tournament in that regard. I kind of wish he had like more serious matches because I think he left something on the table. B block, this has less experience. This has more mostly established New Japan guys, so we're going to try to speed through them faster than I was going through A block. Okada, Okada obviously is probably one of the favorites to win this tournament. It's either probably going to be him or Naito. Okada is a great wrestler. I thought he had a great match with Yoshihashi. I thought him versus Tai Chi is probably my match of the tournament. So far, as I say this, right before the semifinals, that Okada Tai Chi was my favorite match. I want Tai Chi to win so bad. Him and Kenta had a kind of, we'll get to Kenta. I'll bring that up in the Kenta section. Now I had a decent match with Okan. Obviously, him and Ospreay had like a rushed match because they only went 17 minutes, which is obviously very short by their standard. They probably need to go twice as long. But obviously it was still a high quality match. Him versus Phantasma was also really good. He's Okada. He's probably the most underrated wrestler in the world right now in terms of just how great he is. And I know like he's Okada. Everyone just underrated is probably not the right word. Taken for granted. He's certainly taken for granted. The quality, the consistency, his ability to work with a variety of different appointments, his ability to consistently come across as a huge star. Did I just say a variety of different appointments? I meant to say variety of different opponents. I might be talking too fast. I'm locked into this G1. I apologize if I said some nonsense earlier. But Okada is great at working a wide variety of opponents, not a wide variety of appointments. I'm sure he can do that. I'm sure he can go to many different appointments in a given day because he's Okada. But in terms of wrestling, great job working with a bunch of different opponents. Yoshihashi, always a guilty pleasure of mine in the G1. He's being booked more seriously, winning the Never Six-Man titles and then having the tag team with Goto really take off and winning tag team titles multiple times. So he has more credibility now, but I just love Yoshihashi, the great trier, one of the great triers in the history of New Japan Pro Wrestling. He's really comes across so earnestly as a babyface that wants to win matches in front of the crowd, and he rarely does, but I always think he puts in a great effort. And his in-ring stuff is really solid. He doesn't botch moves. His selling is good. He knows when to fire up at the right times. Like, he's just a really good pro wrestler. And I don't know if he'll ever get proper credit for that because he was presented as just kind of a pin eater for like 10 years. But Yoshihashi's damn good, and I kind of had this debate with some people a few weeks ago, which was like, did Yoshihashi actually get better at pro wrestling over the last few years, or is he just being presented differently? And I'm kind of on the side of he was always pretty good and he's being presented as more credible, so he's getting over more. But other people who watch New Japan very closely were pretty insistent that his charisma is way much better. He's connecting with the audience a lot better. He's definitely improved later in his career, which you don't always see with wrestlers, especially ones like Yoshihashi who kind of get comfortable settled into a certain position. Another guy in that boat is Tai Chi, who spent a long time kind of being an underachiever in pro wrestling, and it's kind of like a joke almost that he was Toshiaki Kawada's student, because of all the people for Kawada to train, it's Tai Chi is carrying on his legacy. But obviously the last few years he's turned into a really consistent, really strong singles wrestler. Had some great matches in this tournament. Like I said, my favorite match of the tournament is probably Tai Chi versus Okada. So another strong tournament for him. I hope to see him in many more G1s because he's just a damn good wrestler and he gives it his all every time he's out there. Someone who maybe doesn't give it their all every time out there is Kenta. I thought Kenta was lazy. I thought Kenta was boring. I thought Kenta had almost no interesting matches on this show. In this tournament, the most interesting one I think was probably against Will Ospreay. And that's just like, Ospreay getting the most out of somebody. His match with Okada went 19 minutes, and like 18 minutes of that match are absolutely boring, awful dreck. And then they have a closing stretch that's like an amazing closing stretch. And it made me kind of mad that they had that in them, but they insisted on boring me for 18 minutes before going to this fiery, thrilling conclusion. I would have liked to have seen that urgency a little bit earlier in the match. But a weak tournament for Kenta. Honestly, Kenta's one of those guys who, if I never saw wrestle ever again, I'd be okay with it. I try not to mean like super disrespectful to him, but he's just not an interesting or compelling wrestler at this point in his career. Sorry. Okan. Okan is in trouble. And I say that because you look at this A block and you look at young guys who are getting pushes in this company, specifically, Suji, Shota Umino, and Ren Narita, but also guys like Gabe Kidd, David Finlay, El Phantasmo. And Okan is like in the same age range as them. And Okan was kind of presented as being a guy that could probably get pushed like that. And he seems like he's getting passed by his contemporaries. I don't I just I don't know what to make of him. I loved him as a young boy. Did not like him when he went to England because I didn't like the gimmick. Came back, didn't like the gimmick. Started to get over again. Started having really good matches. I was back on the Okan bandwagon. And over the past year or so, I've kind of fallen off because I don't think he's being protected the same way. He just seems like a mid-card guy on the roster. And he's still got the gimmick where sometimes he wrestles seriously, sometimes he, is doing a lot of character work. And I get that. It's part of the performance, but I just kind of wish he was a big hoss tossing people around. He has the physical presence to do that. I don't know if it's insistence on the gimmick. I don't know if he's lazy. I don't know what the deal is, but he has so much potential, I think, to be a great wrestler. And I think he's stuck doing what he's doing now. And it's disappointing to see that. And I thought he had a pretty disappointing tournament, all things considered. And I think he needed to have kind of a killer tournament because of the pushes the other young guys in the company are getting. He needed to go out there and kill it every night, and he really didn't. So his stock is down for me. Will Ospreay, I don't really have anything to say about Will Ospreay other than he's great. He had great matches throughout the tournament. He had like the best match of Kenta's tournament. He had the best match of Tangaloa's tournament. If you have a limited wrestler and you need someone to get something out of them, Ospreay's your guy. Tangaloa's knees are gone. Dave Meltzer said that Tangaloa's knees were so bad that he was told to retire. So working a G1 on knees that you were told were so bad that you have to retire by doctors, your tournament's not going to end up looking that well. I thought he had a really good tournament a couple years ago, but I think injuries have just slowed him down, and now he's just not an explosive wrestler anymore. When he has an opponent, and I thought Yoshihashi and Phantasmo and Ospreay were good for this. When he has an opponent that is just going to run at him and like do all of the movement and work, then he can still be okay because he's physical, and if he can just stand there and he has a physical presence to him, he's okay. But when he actually has to move, like, and hit the ropes and like do a little work and like carry his own ends, he really struggled. And that's just an injury thing. He was a hard worker, for a number of years for New Japan. He's been very loyal. Both him and his brother have done that, and they're going to have places in the G1 probably for a long time because of that. And I hope maybe next year he's in better shape physically. Phantasmo came close, came on strong at the end. I thought he might be a secret person to kind of advance, and he obviously had that great match with Will Ospreay towards the end of the block. A good tournament for him. He's getting over as a babyface. I thought he definitely did better as the tournament went on. As soon as they got more lively crowds, kind of as they hit the bigger cities down the stretch of the tournament, and I think that's really helped solidify his stance as at least a mid-card babyface with potential to go higher, especially now that he's a heavyweight. Don't know if there's really an opening for him given who else they're pushing in that company, but a really strong tournament for Phantasmo. David Finlay. I love that Finlay has a shillelagh, by the way. The old family heirloom. I wonder if it's the same shillelagh that Fit Finlay used to use. I really hope it is. Loved his match in the quarterfinals against Will Ospreay. Loved the closing stretch. Had a real solid tournament. I think, I don't think he's ever going to be the world champion. I don't think he's like replacing Jay White in terms of like his status in the company. But as a never open guy, as a guy that can lead this kind of, the War Dogs, this kind of scummy, jockish faction of foreign guys, I think he's done pretty well in the role. And he had a pretty good tournament. I like I said, I really like that quarterfinals match. His match with Ishii was also very good. Big surprise there, I know. Tomohiro Ishii, I know he's on the chopping block every year because He's older, and they have other guys to push. And if the tournament was maybe a little bit more condensed without 4 blocks, Ishii probably would have been on the cut. But this man should be in the G1 every year until he retires, because he is the greatest G1 wrestler of all time. He's just so consistent. His wrestling style is perfect for the G1. He had, he had 7 above average matches in this tournament. And they were all about 15 minutes long. And he really he goes out there and he does his stuff. It's the same match every time, and it's still great. Such a good seller. He knows exactly when to fire up as a babyface. Just great stuff. Evil, I don't like Evil's gimmick. I sometimes skip his matches just because I don't like the interference. I thought his match in the quarterfinal against Sonata was decent. I wasn't like appalled by it. Him winning was a legitimate shocking moment, and the fans popped for it in terms of seeing an upset. And he did it clean, which was cool. So I don't have any problem with that. I know some people thought it was like the worst match in the world, and they can't believe Evil's going to the semifinals and all that stuff like that. I don't need to see Evil in big matches, because I just don't like the interference gimmick that is in every single match, and it's not creative or interesting. But I didn't think he needs to win occasionally to remain his status in the company as a threat. And so he's going to have to, he's occasionally going to get some big wins. And if you don't like him, you're just going to have to suck it up. Or you can stop watching New Japan, either one. Tama Tonga, kind of similar to Tangaloa. He's in better shape than Tangaloa was, but I just didn't really think this was a particularly interesting tournament for Tama Tonga. He had a draw with Shingo Takagi, which was okay. And I feel like if you're wrestling Shingo Takagi in a 20-minute draw, your match needs to be better than okay. But again, not really anything to write home about. Shingo, again, kind of an anonymous tournament for Shingo. He's really slid back down the card ever since, he was champion during the clap crowd era. Just a tough time to be champion. Kind of got the title by default due to injuries and things like that, but I think he deserves better. I mean, he finished, in the middle of this block at 7 points. I wish he would be more protected. I understand why he's not. He's not a New Japan guy. He's getting older. They've got other guys that want to push in front of him. But the guy's so damn good. Really one of the best wrestlers of the last 20 years. Aaron Hanare, I liked his first few matches. I really liked his match with Shingo. And he went over Shingo earlier. I think that was on night 1. And I think Hanare has real credibility as a dangerous performer. When I see Toa Hanare, I think this guy comes across as dangerous. He's got good size. He's got a great look. I love his, he mixes in a lot of like martial arts style striking. He just comes across as dangerous. And I always like that in wrestling, because he comes across as credible. And whether it's as a heel or a babyface, or he's just going out there with someone like Shingo or someone like Ishii, and they're just throwing bombs at each other, I'm always going to gravitate towards that for wrestling. And especially in New Japan, it's the perfect place for him. I think he could get a bigger push if they wanted to. I think he's fine where he is right now. I don't need to see like Hanare winning the world title, but he's someone that in the last few G1s has really stood out to me as a really hardworking guy who wants to make this work. Speaking of hardworking guys that want to make this work, Mikey Nichols, mad Mikey Nichols. I could not care less about Mikey Nichols being in this tournament, realistically. But the guy went out there and he said, I'm going to work this G1. I don't know if I'm going to be able to work it next year. I am going to go all out and try to make this as good as I possibly can. And he did that. He had a really strong tournament based on my perception of him. He had a really good match with Toa Hanare on the first night, where he dropped Hanare right on his fucking head. Thought Hanare was dead, but Hanare went on to wrestle 6 more matches, so he's fine. I think he got the most out of this tournament. And you could say the same thing about Eddie Kingston. Obviously, like, this is Eddie Kingston, like, checking off a bunch of things on his bucket list. Being AEW's representative. He's a guy that can lose a lot, so it's okay, but they protected him to a moderate degree. He picked up some side, he beat Shingo, he beat Hanare, he beat Tama Tonga. Eddie held up his end of the bargain. He didn't have any like masterpieces. But he also didn't have like some terrible matches, which he can sometimes lay an egg. Eddie, it's wrong opponent, wrong chemistry. But I didn't really like his match against Evil, but that's more like an Evil problem than Eddie problem. But I thought everything else was good. And this was a good block for Eddie to have good matches in, because he was wrestling guys that kind of wrestle to his style. Mikey Nichols, Shingo, Ishii, Finlay, Hanare. I mean, these are just dudes that are going to come out and they're going to clobber each other in the face. And that's in a lot of ways the spirit of the G1. So Eddie was a good pick, and I'm glad. I'm happy to see him, succeeding so well, because he deserves it. The D block, Tanahashi. Somebody, Todd Martin, said today. I heard him say today that New Japan Pro Wrestling is like WCW in that they never try to make new stars. Just all the old guys getting pushed. And that's obviously an absurd thing to say. And I just think, has this man not watched Hiroshi Tanahashi? The man is getting beat like a taiko drum for the last 2 years. All this guy does is lose. They protected him a little bit. He picked up 3 wins in this tournament, but he lost to Alex Coughlin. He lost to Jeff Cobb. He lost to Zack Sabre Jr. He lost to Naito. So they're trying, they're using his star power to let other people win. Like Alex Coughlin beating Hiroshi Tanahashi was not something I necessarily expected to see, but this is Tanahashi's status. He's the legend that can lose. And he's always going to maintain his aura. He's just physically shot. It's sad to see. I will say his match with Naito was really good. I thought the finish was awesome. I thought Tanahashi looked, despite the fact that it was his last match in the G1, and you just expect him to be ground into a fine powder by that point. I thought he took a lot of risks. He jumped off the top. Him and Sting are like the 2 wrestlers that when they wrestle, they come with this added element of drama, because I'm afraid that they're going to get seriously injured, or they're just going to turn into dust at some point because of the way they physically, Sting because he's just so old, and Tanahashi because of the way he moves. But goddamn it, if he didn't hit Aces High to the floor on Naito, and he didn't go for the high fly flow and eat the knees, and he had a great performance. And he might be shot. He's no longer the steady, consistent performer, but he's still got a few nights of magic per year left in him. And I hope he can continue to do that, for as long as he continues to wrestle. Naito started off slow. I was starting to think, and part of this is because Tanahashi, is getting up there in years and is so slow. Goto, who is right underneath Naito with a block. Goto, suffered an injury and wasn't nearly as good as he normally is in the G1. And then with Naito getting off to a slow start in terms of quality, I was like, is Naito in the same kind of class of Goto and Tanahashi? And, you can look at Kenta or even someone like Shinsuke Nakamura as kind of his contemporaries, his major wrestlers in Japan. It's like, are these guys, is Naito part of this group where he's, too injured and he's just past his prime? And I think most people would consider that physically he is past his prime, but he did, I think, rally into pretty good form by the end of the tournament. He's obviously still going. He's probably gonna have a killer match with Will Ospreay. He had a really good match with Tanahashi to kind of wrap up the block for him. I thought he did really well. He's gonna go to Wrestle Kingdom. He's gonna do the roll call finally at Wrestle Kingdom. Maybe. He's still a big star. And he's still got enough in him where I think you can still put him in that position and he's still going to achieve. Goto, as I mentioned, Goto suffered an injury, so this was not the usual great Goto that we saw. I do think that, he suffered an injury. I think on the first night he hurt his rib, and that impacted kind of the rest of his tournament. I do think by the end, his match with Zack Sabre Jr. was pretty damn good, so he kind of rallied back. But the G1 did not stand for Goto this year. The G and G1 did not stand for Goto this year, unfortunately. Just he got injured. That's all I can say is that he's still wrestling at a high level. As most of that's doing tag work with Yoshihashi, but he's still having really good matches, and I expect to see him again next year in the G1. Zack Sabre Jr. Obviously, good push here. He made the quarterfinals as he came out of this block. Zack is a great tournament wrestler, and what I like about Zack so much is that he gets his submissions over and he gets all his roll-ups over. So his matches have this just extra added element of drama to them where you never know when they're going to actually end. And that's cool because these matches have these elements of drama that no other match has. And especially in a tournament where he's kind of established himself as this really good tournament wrestler that can kind of beat anyone in any tournament, won the New Japan Cup before, things like that, really help establish him as this credible challenger. And so when he's out there and he's wrestling a guy like Naito, he's wrestling a guy like Tanahashi, and he's wrestling Goto, and he can do all these kind of cool roll-ups and things like that, and the crowd's really into them, he does really well. So another strong performance by Zach. Zach, talk about this more like around the Hall of Fame season. I know he's not on the Hall of Fame ballots, but if Zack Sabre Jr. was on the Hall of Fame ballot, I would consider voting for him because I think he is the best wrestler I've ever seen at this specific style that he does. And he's been great for like 10 years. And if we're going by like number of 4-star matches that I've seen, Zach is up there with pretty much anybody. The guy is so consistent and so good and has been for a really long time. Never hear any buzz about him being a Hall of Famer, but I feel like if I were to talk to people like, do you think Zack Sabre Jr. is a Hall of Famer? And they were to really think about it, people that have watched his career will say yes, because he's just such an outstanding wrestler. Toru Yano, I did not watch any of his matches, so I can't comment on him. Jeff Cobb, kind of like his buddy Okan. Cobb's 40, so he's not nearly as young as Okan, and I don't think they have as much invested in the idea. He's not a New Japan produced product, so I don't think they have as much invested in him. But Cobb's also kind of a guy where he's been booked strong in these tournaments before. He's a big monster guy, so he's kind of like Hikuleo in the sense that he has credibility where he can beat kind of anybody at any time. But I don't think he had a particularly notable tournament. I don't think he had any like amazing matches. Solid stuff, but nothing to write home about. The same can be said for Alex Coughlin. I don't out of the War Dogs that were in this tournament, Finlay, Kidd, and Coughlin. Coughlin had the weakest tournament. Part of that might be just because he didn't this D block necessarily didn't have a ton of great opponents for him. It was, old Tanahashi, Goto with a busted rib, Yano, Shane Haas and Cobb. It wasn't a great tournament. Like if you put him in a different block, I think he maybe has a few more standout matches, but he just kind of felt like a guy here. And he's definitely, I would say, like the third guy in the War Dogs unit in terms of the heavyweights. I think like Clark Connors stood out more, as a junior than Coughlin does as a heavyweight, but not really a strong tournament for him. Shane Haas has that match against Naito, which I thought was outstanding. Really big upset. Never expected it to happen. It was kind of like the biggest upset of the G1 when it happened. He hit his finisher, which I didn't know what his singles finisher was because it's usually a tag team action. And he basically like picked, I forget even what it was called, but he like picked Naito up like he was and like twirled him around like he was a piece of pizza, and then did like kind of like a big boss man style slam. It was fucking awesome. And he just like, I didn't know that was his finisher, so I'm watching the match. And, Naito's going for Justino, and then Haas just like picks him up, spins him around, drops him, and I was like, what the hell was that? And then it's 1, 2, 3, and I was like, whoa, that's Shane Haas' finisher, and he won with it. Just like one of those fun moments from the tournament I'll remember forever. Other than that, I don't think he really did anything memorable, but he did get that win over Naito, and it was done in a really cool way. So I'm always gonna like think fondly of him in the tournament, even if that was the only thing he really did of note. But it's kind of the G1. I think that New Japan is kind of like in a rebuilding phase. Like in some ways, they're focusing on getting a lot of guys over. In this match, they had a ton of guys in this tournament. Maybe they shouldn't have as many people as they did. Maybe it would be better with a more condensed field. But I had fun watching it. Like I said, I watched pretty much all of it. And I do think that they have a lot of young wrestlers going in interesting directions. And I think I want to have Alan Forel on the show eventually. We've been talking about it for kind of a while, but the big trend I see in Peru, kind of across the board, look at what they're doing in All Japan, look at what Dragon Gate is doing, you look at what Stardom is doing. There's a real youth movement trying to create kind of several exciting young wrestlers right now, and trying to make those next stars in a real concentrated effort. A few years ago, it seemed like, especially with All Japan, and Noah is still like this in a lot of cases, relying on nostalgia acts and guys in their 40s and 50s. And we've hit a breaking point in Japan where I think a lot of promotions are like, it's time for us to create a new generation of stars. And while the business overall in Japan is down, I do think it's kind of an exciting time to be watching because I do think that a lot of interesting young talent is getting pushed, and I do think that was the case in this tournament. Even if some people, you look at the people who made the finals, the knockout stage of the tournament, it's pretty much all established names, with the exception of David Finlay and Hikuleo. But if you watch this tournament like I did, you'll notice that there's a lot of cool and interesting stuff that's happening kind of up and down the card. And I think it was a fun and entertaining tournament even before we get to the finals, which are going to be this weekend. But that's it. Wow, this went longer than I thought it was going to. But hopefully it comes across well. I'm definitely going to upload it tonight, and we'll see. Most people probably won't listen to this until Saturday or Sunday, maybe some Monday listening. If you're later, it's not really. I don't think it's really that time sensitive. But thanks so much for everyone who's listened, and I will see you again in a while.
Do you like wrestling trivia? Then check out the 5-Star Match Game, the Pro Wrestling Quiz Show. I'm Joe Gagney, and every episode, I grill 3 contestants with 5 rounds of power-packed wrestling trivia. We have over 30 evergreen episodes in the archives covering WWE, AEW, Japan, Mexico, and much, 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 much more. Play along at home and check it out today.
Cheering at pro wrestling shows in Japan is back, and 2023 is already shaping up to be a big year in the history of pro res. That's why you should listen to the Emerald Flow Show. From the Royal Road to the Green Mat, Paul and Gerard take you into the world of All Japan Pro Wrestling and Pro Wrestling Noah. Not only do we analyze events, but we examine business, who is getting over, what angles are working or not. Occasionally, we take a look at other Japanese promotions like DDT and Zero One. So if you're looking for more coverage of the world of Japanese wrestling, check out the Emerald Flow Show on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, available on all of your favorite podcast apps.